Hello again. So this is episode 12 of the development diary for the space strategy game Fragile Existence. I may have promised in my previous video that by the end of the month I would have ships moving around and it was going to be glorious, but I'm not quite there yet. I got sort of hung up on some design decisions, and ultimately I'm really glad that I did, because what I was originally doing was I had a sort of in-game system map that essentially looked like this. As we see on in the system editor window, and essentially what it did was it sort of peeled back from your current location in space, and it just sort of popped this grid in front of the camera, and these faded in, and that was essentially it. And I couldn't help but think that that wasn't good enough. As far as I'm concerned, a game where you've got to move your fleet around the solar system, you're probably going to spend quite a bit of time on the system map. Now, I'd like to think you might be spending a lot of time in the sort of the planet view, just sort of moving units around on the ground, moving ships from sort of planet to planet, moving your units around, getting resources from different planets, moving to another one. Ultimately, you're going to want to zoom out and get this sort of big picture view a lot of the time. So, you know, ideally you'd have like a fog of war type thing on here, and the ships, as they move from planet to planet along a line that sort of goes from one to the other, that you would actually see a sort of circle around it that shows its sort of scanning range, and any enemy units or ships that come within that circle would be shown on the map. Now, yes, you can do that in 2D, but what I found was happening was that I was drawing icons to represent things. I was thinking, how are the planets all going to be represented? Am I just going to use these sort of very basic icons that just have a color? How jarring would that be when you sort of move to the actual system, the planet view, and you're going from that to the actual proper planet displays? It kind of felt a bit weird. And I was taking these thumbnails, I was putting them on the map, and then I was like trying to put little ship icons over the top of it, and it just didn't look very good. And so I probably spent about a week. I wasted about a week coming to the realization that that was just not going to work. So what I've actually come up with instead is, and I was always thinking Homeworld, I love that sort of zoom out thing in Homeworld, where you got that tactical display, and you know, you can see everything that's going on in the sort of surrounding area. Sure, Homeworld didn't deal with whole solar systems. You know, instead of planets being the big objects as they are in my game, what Homeworld obviously did was it had the mothership was the biggest icon on the map, and everything else was just sort of iconography around it. So I've done that. Yeah, there we go. It looks effortless, but this was quite a bit of work. So what we're seeing here is actually the cameras aren't doing what you might think they're doing. So here it looks like we are close up on an object, and we can actually now zoom in again. I've added that back in. It's a whole new camera system, completely redeveloped from the ground up. And when we zoom out, we're actually switching to a low poly version of the same model, and this entire solar system map is operating at a tiny scale, but everything's orientated in the same direction. So the view vector is the same, but when we zoom in, we're actually zooming out to the large scale, and it sort of it looks unimpressive, and in a way that's good, because it shows just how incredibly seamless the transition is. I'm very happy with it. I mean, you can see some slight sort of pop in. Obviously, the shaders are operating slightly differently, and as you zoom out even more, you get the icons, and you know, you get this sort of view. And of course, this pink mesh is just a transparent plane. That could be, you know, you can add graphics on there. You can make that look really snazzy, but I just focus on functionality for now. You can actually hop between planets as well. So this is now how you move from planet to planet, as you sort of hop like that. And the rocky type is got a slightly different icon, and you may notice that the craters don't show up correctly on the low poly version at the moment, but that's fine. I'm still very happy with where I am. Obviously the sun is there as well. I've actually used a stencil system so that we can cut out these sort of hollow regions in that transparent mesh. That took a bit of work. There's a little bit of problem there with the ocean shader sort of showing through that transparent mesh, but I think it's just to do with the order of rendering, and so I'll fix that at some point. But yeah, it doesn't necessarily look super impressive, but this was quite a lot of designing. And I'm going to switch over to Unity to show what's actually happening behind the scenes, and then I'll sort of come back into the game afterwards. Okay, so we're in the Unity editor here, and what I've done is I've split out the scene view so we can sort of see what's happening with the camera. So this is the camera frustum you can see here moving as I rotate the mouse. Okay, obviously it's going to be a little bit jittery because it's running an editor. But as we zoom out, we actually bring up this system map, which is actually at the origin. And if I now zoom in, ironically, and ignore these lines for a moment, we'll actually see that the camera is now operating on this much smaller scale. And as I focus on another planet, zoom out a little bit more, you can see how the camera is now moving around this tiny little object right next to the origin. And then zooming in, we actually now switch to a zoomed out mode, which is again at the origin as all the planets are. Now if I zoom right out, you can sort of see what else there is that I actually have in this scene. You've got the star a long way away, you've got the UI system, and you've got all these strange looking lines, which I will get to in a moment. But literally everything I do is at the origin. It ends up a bit jumbled in the scene view, obviously, because I have to zoom right down to see this small scale model of the solar system. So each planet is rendered at the origin, and the entire sort of solar system, the mini solar system, is also rendered at the origin with its own sun, as you can see here, and everything's orientated in the same direction. Just when you zoom into the planet mode, you only get that environment around it, and it's only when you zoom out that you actually move into this environment. Okay, so I'm going to switch back to the game. Okay, so we're back in FE, and now I'm going to get into what those strange sort of lines actually were. Because it's one thing to have this solar system model, we need to be able to move ships from point to point, planet to planet, and all those good things. And that's where the spline-based movement system comes in. Now, as you may well see, the ships are currently not on the spline. The idea is that ships essentially attach themselves to these lines, as you can see here, and the spline, which you wouldn't necessarily normally see, this is just done for debug reasons. The spline basically says where the ship can move to, and as you get close to the planet, what it'll do is it'll generate a curved spline to the planet, and I'm basically going to overhaul the entire orbital movement system, so it uses the spline system as well. Now a spline is just a series of points that are connected together. You can use Bezier curves, or you could just have a linear line like you've got here. It's essentially a point at the end and a point at the warp-in point, and it just draws a line between the two. It's similar to what I'm doing with the system map system, which I'll show you in a moment, but it uses a much more sophisticated system, so that when the ship is on this line, the line is just like a guide line, so the ship will follow it. It'll be able to accelerate, decelerate, and it'll just sort of have a distance along the line, and that's what you use basically as the ship controller. It's a case of going from 0 at this end to 1 at this end, and when it gets to 1, it knows it's at the end of the spline and it moves on to another one. So that makes it very easy to do a node-to-node pathfinding system, because all I need to do is feed in which splines it's going to use, and that's it. Now the system map's got the spline system as well. So as you zoom out, you actually get the connection splines, which you won't actually see when you zoom in. to the planet. You see it just sort of disappears at the point, but it's definitely heading in the right direction. You know, it's where the indicator is, and it sort of gets filled in. You may well see when we go to the system map mode. So that's an example of a very simple network. If I back out and show what that looks like in the system map view, and what I've done here is I've basically just added a navigation line, what I'm calling a space lane from point to point, and the warping point also has a one-way lane as well, so you can't actually go back that way. And you can actually add in more lanes using this system, but I'll show that in a moment. First thing I want to do is just show a much more sophisticated looking network. Okay, so this particular system is has got a lot more connections, a lot more planets. I think it's 8 or 9, and as we zoom out, see the entire network here, which I've connected each planet together, or most of this is sort of the hub. This is the one where you come in, and the idea is that you'd be able to move along this spline. Your ships come to the planet, they enter orbit, and then they have the option of all these different connections going towards these other planets. So you literally just select the ship, select say Geneva out here, double click, sorry, and that would set the move target to Geneva. When it comes to things that are much further away, like for example this planet, you can still set it as a target in the main map. So if you've got a ship selected over at London here, then if you come to the map, and then it'll have a little target icon, and you'll be able to select that, and then it will know to come along this spline and then this spline. Yeah, so nice and simple. And it's all about nice simple functionality like that. You know, even though this will be a pausable game, I wanted to make sure that everything was as effortless as possible. There's actually a little bug here where the craters are showing up on some of the planets. I know why it is, but I've left it because it kind of looks interesting. Yeah, I think adding craters to the terrestrial planets might be a nice idea. Anyway, this particular planet here, Geneva, is showing the idea of other nodes being connected to the central node, which is always going to be the planet. So this is sort of substituting for things like moons. Fully intend to have moons. I think it's a great idea. For example, say this was a gas planet, and you're like, well, I can't land on a gas planet. That's not very interesting. If it's still got a series of 5 rocky or terrestrial moons, then that's still interesting. You're going to end up using the gas planet as sort of like a hub, where you sort of send your scouts out to the sort of the points of interest around it. So you would move up here, and then send a ship or two to this moon here. Imagine a moon. I know there's no moon there, but it's I've been designing things so that moons can be added, and yeah, so it wouldn't just be that. It'd be asteroid fields around here, and you have to sort of, when the line goes through the asteroid field, for example, you'll actually have to sort of slow down, and your ships will have to sort of navigate it. You actually have bigger points of interest, like big asteroids that you can actually move on top of, and so you'll be able to move towards that. You'll be able derelict ships, nebulous regions, pretty much anything from space sci-fi. The options are sort of limitless. So if I go and show what this looks like in the system editor, which one is she? Alright, so you can see that's how I've connected it. But I also have branching points. So you're mostly just seeing lines here, but I've used these branching points at Geneva just to sort of simulate the moons. But what you can also do is, once you've got a branching point, which you place down like this, you can then draw a line between them, and then a branching point actually literally allows for paths to be branched. So you can have one going in and 2 going out, or whichever way around you would think it. So you can actually now move along here, or you can move like this or like this. And whilst that doesn't necessarily look very interesting at the moment, because there's not much to actually place around the planets, it sort of paves the way really for quite sophisticated networks. And so yeah, this UI took a bit of developing so that things stick to the lines nicely. And it sort of shows a thinner line when you've got a local line, and then these thicker lines are planet to planet lines. And then we can add a connection here. We can add a branch here. Oh, we can't do that one because it's actually currently already got 3 lanes entering it. So you can't actually do that. But we can do the warp in point. And so one of the things that might be good about this is that you say when you warp in here and you've got to move your ship towards London, it might be nice if you could just say, well, actually, I don't want to go to London in order to be able to go to Geneva. I might as well have a branching point here. And then I can literally just choose for the ship to diverge to Geneva immediately. And so in this case, from the point of view of the warp-in point, you'd have a branch going off to the left that you could assign to your ship, and it would just straight away go to Geneva. Okay, so it's all about how the designer chooses to design that solar system. So I think I'm going to leave it there. I could have added some ships onto the actual splines and showed what that looks like, but that's actually not actually that interesting. And part of the problem is I haven't dealt with how the orbits are going to work. So it's all about how these lines now connect to the orbit, and then from the orbit connect to other planets. That's the one missing piece that I have in this sort of node network and this lane network. So I'm going to finish that, and hopefully in a few weeks I'll be able to show off, you know, the ship movement system in its full. But I thought I'd do a sort of interim update to show the Homeworld style zooming, which I'm very happy with. And yeah, again, thanks for watching as always, and see you soon.